My name is Joe LaTorre, and I graduated in 2015. I was part of the honors program. My major was psychology, and I minored in religious studies. I'll give you a brief introduction about what I've done since I've graduated and what I'm doing now. In 2016, so that's the year after I graduated, I went to Nepal on something called a Fulbright scholarship. Fulbright is an excellent way to live in another country, basically any country in the world, and you you get paid for it, and it's a really nice setup. After my time in Nepal, I had the travel bug, and I went to China, and I lived in China for a year and a half. And then I finally said, okay, what am I going to do what am I going to do with all of this? So I moved back to the Boston area. Well, I applied for graduate school, and so now I'm doing my master's at Harvard. I'm part of the divinity school there, and my program is in Buddhist studies. And so I'm focusing on the Himalaya and southwestern China, but I do other things too. When you're part of the Harvard community, you really go all over the place. What I want to first do is really paint the picture of a human history. And what I mean when I say that is, if you actually consider how long humans have been around, I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling that humans have been around for over 200,000 years, Homo sapien. And of course, if you study, the progression of human development, moving out of Africa into the Fertile Crescent and whatnot, humans become more complex, and we start to do things, we start to settle, we start to grow crops and whatnot. But only very recently have we had this, if you know what I mean. We are becoming extremely modernized at a alarmingly rapid rate, speed, and we need to kind of open our eyes to this and consider the effects that this is not just having on us, but our planet in general. We have been around for over 200,000 years. If we really try to digest this, a lot of the assumptions that we have about life can basically become shattered. One example is our religious, or if you have a religion or if you have a faith, how does that, interact with our religious understanding of the world? From the Christian perspective, for example, what are we to say about people who lived before Christ? How were they to go to heaven if there was no Jesus to set an example? In another manner, other than religion, technology itself is a completely new thing in, once again, electricity. If you really put it in context, how many years out of 200,000 years, how long we've had electricity, the sheer probability that you were born in this moment in time is really mind-boggling. And we're pretty lucky, actually, because as it turns out, life before now was not that great, actually. I know we like to romanticize and say, oh, wouldn't it have been nice to live in 16th century England where everyone wore these beautiful clothes. But actually, this is a time when there were no kinds of equalities that we have set in place right now. And then, of course, kind of coming back to what I really want to talk to you all about is how this has kind of created what what is known as a global village, right? That's what people say we are. That is our era, is the time of the global village. We have now really mastered the art of travel and communication and the exchange of goods, so much so that, you know, you could be eating fish from Japan tonight, or that had just arrived here within hours, or obviously send a text or email to someone across the globe. And so these are all things that they're new. I know that we were kind of born into the brink of this all, the frontier, and we kind of assume that this is normal, the way things are supposed to be. But, you know, whether they're supposed to be this way or not, who can say, but this is new. To this end, you know, what do people think about globalization in general, and what are there's obviously a lot of pros and cons with globalizing our planet, and what do people think are some good things about living in a global village?
Getting insight from other people's cultures and beliefs, and, you know, knowing other things about different places to have another perspective.
Right. Yeah, one of these big things is having another perspective. I mean, not too long ago, if you grew up in North Andover or the Merrimack Valley, this would be all you ever knew, all you ever saw from birth until death. So that, in that regard, you know, perspective. We have a vast network of resources, not just technical resources, but also experts around the world who we can tap into at any time. Another result of us living in this moment in time is that we've kind of assumed the right, or assumed that the planet is a right, you know, that it is our right, and that we have the right to exploit the planet. And unfortunately, polar ice caps are melting at an unprecedented rate, and a lot of people are suffering because of that. We might not be around much longer, actually. When I first found out that they were sending me to Nepal, when I say they, it's this Fulbright program is done by the Department of State, and so they basically set you up anywhere where there's an embassy, a U.S. embassy. And so they were going to send us to Nepal, and then the mega earthquake hit. So then what followed was, you know, a series of bits on TV showing how the casualty rate was basically just steadily increasing as they were finding bodies during their relief efforts. And I think the number started around 300 or 400, but by the time I was ready to pack my bags and go to Nepal, it had already reached 8,000. And I was, you know, prepared mentally for coming to a post-disaster Nepal. I will say that in a couple regards, you know, it wasn't, when I got on the ground, it was bad, but not exactly in the same way that the media portrayed it. So that's another thing, is that, you know, you might read books or watch TV or watch movies about other countries, but rarely is that ever the same thing as going there. So, and what I found was that, well, I was living with a homestay family, and that basically meant that I had to adopt, their lifestyle, which was, and I can remember very clearly because I hated the food there, and the eating schedule. So basically, in Nepal, because so many families are still dependent on agriculture, they need to wake up very, very early, sometimes as early as 4 in the morning, and they eat breakfast at, 7, and they have a plate of rice, a heaping mound of rice. I'm not kidding, it's this big. And that's what my host father could eat. I obviously couldn't eat that. But, and then you have a side of beans. That's it. Okay, and the name for this meal in Nepali is called dal bhat, which means beans and rice. That's it. And everyone knows that dal bhat's, the food of Nepal. It's like the national dish, and everyone eats it, and they make jokes about it. They say, dal bhat power 24 hour, because when you're living an agrarian lifestyle, you need carbs, you need rice and beans to, do your work. And, I like craved chicken, like I needed chicken in my diet. And so I would have to sneak away to the city every week to get chicken and pizza. So, the truth of it all is that life is very different wherever you go, but in some strange way you can pull the metaphor out as, no matter where you go in the world, there's always a pizza. Because, that's what globalization has done for us. And when I would go to this, this pizza restaurant, the people who were waiting on me were Nepali people, and think about for them from the perspective of a middle-class Nepali being able to interact on a daily basis with Americans or foreigners who are actually interested in coming to a place like Nepal. It's always I can't quite describe it, but even in China, whenever you meet someone who you say, and they might ask you like, what are you doing here in China? What are you doing here in Nepal? Why Nepal? You could go anywhere in the world. Why here? Look at our country. It's a disaster. Our government doesn't care about us. Why are you here? And so there's always this kind of attitude of like awe or kind of fascination in us as well as tourists. What are you doing here? So, I really think that travel and to open up your minds to these things, it's really life-changing. Someone told me once, and I'll never forget it, they said, a fellow teacher of mine, they may forget what we said to them, but they'll never forget how we made them feel. And that kind of stuck with me, is that, you can make a very large impact on people's lives by going out here, and whether it's teaching or even just traveling, or who knows, if you're even in ever in a part of the world where you think that people might be interested, children might be interested in seeing someone come up and give a speech in front of their classroom, why not give it a try, and say, hey, I'm in the area, I'd love to, meet the kids or something like that. I'm sure it'd have a profound impact. After traveling this nomadic lifestyle for 2.5 years and going all over the place, I came back and I said, I need to see more of the States. So actually just last week, I went on a road trip a mini road trip, to Washington D.C., and I drove through, a few different states along the way. But even in the U.S., the landscape, the culture, the norms, the customs, they change dramatically. Raise your hand if you're not from the Merrimack Valley. Okay, can some of you just say where you're from? Where are you from? Connecticut, okay. Yeah? New York? Rhode Island, cool. When I first got to China, every time I sneezed or someone sneezed, no one said anything. No, bless you, bless me, excuse me, nothing. And it was really strange at first because I wanted to say something to people. And then, I realized you don't say anything. If you say it, you're awkward, Whereas here, if you sneezed right next to me and I didn't say anything, that'd definitely be, rude. One thing that I would say is kind of a total game changer is something like a grant like Fulbright, because that kind of catapulted me into in a world where possibilities abound. So, there are some good programs out there that I definitely recommend you look into. There's the Peace Corps, where you go abroad and you can teach for 2 years, and now they let you choose the country before you put your name in a hat, and then they said, Joe, Thailand. So, there's no need to be nervous about that. You can kind of say, well, I'm interested in, this part of the world. If you can show that you care about giving back to people and giving back to the planet, I think that's one way to really kind of make your dreams come true. If you can paint it in that way, then grants open up, schools will take you in, and you can kind of just get funding to do whatever you want. Like someone like myself who's in the humanities, I lacked those skills that you guys have in the sciences and in business and other more applicable fields, I guess you could say. But especially if you're coming from one of those backgrounds and you can say, hey, I want to go see what pollution problems are going on in China right now, and I want to fix them because they're destroying the planet. I think that you can definitely get on a Fulbright grant and do these really incredible things. The fact is that I had no idea what a Fulbright was. But now that I'm at Harvard, or even before Harvard, when I would meet with people, they all knew what a Fulbright was. And that realization for me was kind of like, education is definitely a classist thing. Growing up in a middle class family, I was not taught about Fulbright grants. That's part of the reason why I want to be here today and tell you guys that these opportunities do exist and they are as good as they sound. If I do wish that someone gave a kind of a talk like this to me and told me very directly what this is and how you can get it and things like that. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that there is a person on campus who is responsible for addressing Fulbright applicants' needs. All right, well, if that's it, thank you. I hope that the takeaway of this is hopefully, that one, we really need to reconsider our place in human history. We're really lucky to be born right now, and the tools that we have, there should be no excuses. We should not be letting this planet disintegrate before our eyes, and we should, we have much more opportunities to have a really enriched human experience. So I hope that some of you will consider, going out there and exploring the world. Thank you.